the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. When it comes to great queens, few come close. Her marriage to a duke 11 years younger created a power couple unequalled. She is the mother of two of the most famous kings in history. Her story is one of chivalry, romance, dedication and defiance. She is no kept woman, and her actions against her tyrannical husband would incur a king's wrath. This is her story.
Oh, I've forgotten what happened last time.
Watch episode 1 then.
Oh no, I want a recap.
Oh, God forbid it. I'll put a link in the description.
Oh, that's a good idea.
As we all know, it is the year 1137, and Eleanor, the teenage Duchess of Aquitaine, is about to marry the heir apparent of France, Louis the Younger. His father, Louis le Gros, appears to be too ill to attend the wedding, but puts things in motion. The French king learns that Eleanor is under armed guard at Weir in Bordeaux, fearful of hostilities. So he sends his son to Weir with a contingent of knights to secure his distressed Eleanor. Louis the Younger is also sent with 3 massive chests full of money. Spend what you want, the credit's good. He's got another box full of jewellery, especially for Eleanor. But they are cautious, as the journey will take Louis the Younger through the domain of Theobald of Champagne, who is, thankfully, part of the Royal Expedition Force. But the route also takes them dangerously close to a rival, Geoffroy, Count of Anjou, a powerful rival who is married to that very Empress Matilda who got usurped 2 years prior. But from Louis's point of view, if anything, it relieved France of some stress, as there was no way the new King of England, Stephen of Blois, was going to threaten French territories. And at this point, France is dwarfed by its vassals, so Louis le Gros clearly sees Aquitaine as a way to increase the size of his territory. Soon, he'll have more domain than all of his vassals combined. The wedding had to happen at all costs. I will be going on quite a tangent for a few minutes, I'll just warn you, explaining Louis's journey. Because, let's be frank, Eleanor is stuck at Weir under armed guard. It's not like she's doing much. I'll also stress the health of the French king, Louis le Gros. He's not earned that nickname for nothing. At this point, he's apparently so overweight he can mount neither horse nor woman. I'm not fat shaming, that's just how it's said. Besides, if I was, I'd be a hypocrite. He's only in his mid-50s, but he's clearly making a bid to secure the future of France. As I say, I cannot find any evidence he attended the wedding. But he can be placed at Château Petit-Saint-Prier, which is a short hop from Paris, on the 1st of August, just days after the event took place. And there is no way he could be in Bordeaux then leg it up there to Paris in such quick time. Not with all his entourage. So it explains why he has sent his son with such a large presence. The French king, Louis the Gros, has also sent Abbot Suger, pretty much his right-hand man, as Louis the Younger's advisor. The two were already well acquainted, as the statesman was also the young king's tutor growing up. Suger also heads to the Saint-André Cathedral in Bordeaux, where the wedding would be held. Here plans are made with the Aquitanian Archbishop Geoffroy de Leroux to make the wedding preparations. But this won't happen overnight. It'll take a while for Louis's forces to arrive at Weir, so the Bishop of Chartres, Geoffroy de Live, is sent there on a private mission to meet Eleanor and aid her in all matters. All the pieces were in place, and the stage was set for Louis the young king to make his way across France into Aquitaine, and this he did in the heat of the sweltering 12th century summer. Upon crossing the Loire, Louis's entourage arrived in Limoges on the 29th of June. Everything was going well, and while here, he received homage from the vassals that had arrived here. His father had asked him politely to lay claim to Poitou and Aquitaine, and this he did. Now, there was another task that his father had bestowed on him, for Louis the Younger was prone to mood swings, pretty extreme, and he's under strict orders to restrain this temper. The French could not afford offending anybody. Remember, their vassals outnumber them dramatically. There were far too many possible enemies about for them to take the risk, so Louis was on his best behaviour. It was bad enough with the two rival brother-in-laws who had come with them, Champagne and Vermandois. Thankfully, they were getting along. And here in Limoges, Louis also met with the Count of Toulouse, Alfonso Jourdan, and the next day, the 30th, they all enjoyed the Feast of St. Martial, the patron saint of the city, his tomb there being a popular place for pilgrims. From Limoges, they headed for Périgueux, and then made the last part of the journey to Bordeaux. He arrived there on the 11th of July, where he pitched up camp on the outskirts of the city, on the banks of the river Garonne. Tents from this sizable entourage, plus anyone else picked up on the way, like Alfonso, would have dominated the area, as there is no way even a city of this size would be able to accommodate 500 knights, plus retainers and servants, horses and everything else. But most would be camping outside. But it's not like it's cold or anything. This is a medieval warm period after all. The weather was lovely. If anything, it's a trifle hot. And now word had spread fast across the land that Louis the young king was approaching. The wedding. People had come far and wide. But after all, he's getting married to probably the most beautiful woman in Christendom, according to sources. No one wanted to miss it. And the next day, Louis was escorted over the river and into the city, met personally by Geoffroy de Leroux, the Archbishop of Bordeaux, on behalf of Duchess Eleanor. Yes, that was quite a tangent. So, the journey had been made, and finally, Eleanor of Aquitaine was no longer under armed protection for her safety, but free to rule her duchy, with the help of her husband-to-be, of course. This was to be the first time they had met, and, in case you were wondering, in the 12th century there was no custom for not seeing the bride. So, met they did, and apparently they were besotted by each other. While the two lovebirds got acquainted, Abbot Suger and Geoffroy de Leroux would be getting down to details, putting this epic wedding into action. Around 1,000 guests would attend this event, though there were some naughty vassals who would swan fealty to Eleanor's father that were late arriving. The Count of Angoulême was nowhere to be seen. And given that Angoulême is only around 80 miles or so from Bordeaux, he had no excuse, trust me. But her other vassals turned up. For the most part, everyone was looking forward to this grand event that would marry Aquitaine to France. On the 25th of July, 1137, a hot summer Sunday, The two were married at Saint-André Cathedral at Bordeaux. Being Bordeaux, naturally, Archbishop Diderot conducted the ceremony. Who doesn't love a good wedding? Well, on that note, I was actually quite fatigued by the marriage between William and Kate of the British royal family, and buggered off to Nottingham to escape the whole thing. I was living in London at the time, and what was on the screen at the first pub I entered? The salutation. The wedding. So I went to the trip to Jerusalem instead. Long story. Anyway, back to Eleanor's wedding. And what a lavish sight it was. Eleanor's dress is said to have been a gown of the finest scarlet. And yes, scarlet, because the Victorian concept of a white wedding was centuries away. She must have looked beautiful. And during the ceremony, Eleanor and Louis both sat on thrones, situated on a raised dais in the cathedral itself, wearing the ducal crowns of Aquitaine. And here they were acknowledged. Louis the young king was now bestowed the titles of Duke of both Aquitaine and Gascony, as well as Poitou. Eleanor still controlled the territory. They were hers by her birthright, and there is a kind of prenup going on, arranged by her father before he died. So yes, Louis is Duke, but is ruling in her name. And if, God forbid, anything would happen to this marriage, then the lands would remain hers. So Louis Le Gros's plan, the father of the groom, is that any children the two would have, well, they're also hers by birthright, they would inherit her lands, thus does France. A tradition we have, that existed all the way back in the 12th century, is the giving of rings. And it was an important part of the tradition back then as it is now. And after the ceremony, the married two then proceeded through the joyous crowds, down streets bedecked in tapestries and leaves. Music all around. Everybody wanted to see them. A grand spectacle, a grand event. They arrived at Lambriere Palace for the feast. But alas, practically nothing is known about the pomp and circumstance there. Why? Because the scribes opted for a cop-out. All we get is from La Chronique de Moringhi, that only the words of great Cicero or those of Seneca could fully describe the splendour, the sheer variety of the meat and the other exotic goods that lined the tables. No words could do justice. Yeah, well, that's one way of getting out of describing the feast without offending anyone. Look at it like this. You could just imagine the baker from Orléans travelling all the way to Lambriere, only not to get a mention in the texts. Whew, the scandal. Imagine the farter who travelled all the way from Angoulême, finding he was omitted. Whew. It was most likely easier to simply explain it like the monks did who wrote La Chronique de Marigny. Quite clever when you think about it. Everyone is happy. This little feast was just the beginning. There was a lot more to happen yet. They had yet to make their slow journey back from Lambriere to Paris, leaving later that afternoon, not long after the ceremony itself. First, heading for Poitiers, crossing the Charente River, spending their first night together at Telebourg. And on the 1st of August, they arrived in Poitiers, to much fanfare, staying in Montbouillon Tower. Oh, and if you remember, Dangerous of Lillebouchard from last episode, aka Dangerosa, Eleanor's grandmother, well, Morbihan Castle was built for her. And Dangerosa was very much alive during this time, so it's only fitting that these two would meet again. Two powerful women in one space. I wonder how Louis fared. You've probably noticed that French is not a language I can speak very well, even pronounce very well for that matter. It's not my forte, though I have my sources and I know more than I let on. It's the pronunciations I find hard. Still, I try to get as close as possible. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward, other times, whew, oh boy. You've also probably noticed that regarding England, I'm often using the French terms rather than the English. I introduced Geoffrey Plantagenet, the Count of Anjou, earlier, as Geoffroy, and his son is Henri, not Henry, because these are Normans. We might call them Geoffrey and Henry nowadays, but I'm currently telling a French story involving lands that will one day be part of France. The people here spoke dialects of French, whether d'Oil or Languedoc. Maybe if this story ever involved England in any big way, I'd have to switch positions. But enough of that. Let's get back to the lands of France, for some bad news has befallen the kingdom. Now, Louis and Eleanor would not have known this, not yet, but back in France, King Louis le Gros has passed away in Château Béthise, where he was staying, dying of dysentery of all things. So while Eleanor and her new husband are prepared for another big feast, young Eleanor would not have known that she was now the queen of all France. This feast at Morbihan Tower would last a whopping great 7 days. A proper pig out. All diets were certainly thrown out the window at this point. And it's not just the nobility but retainers, the staff, everyone. Remember, 1,000 guests attended the wedding, and now they're going on a pig out tour de force. But at least while they were here, they were invested with the titles of Poitiers. There would also be many, many more gifts, like this one that Eleanor presented to her husband. It's a Moorish vase. And what a vase it was. Take a look. A perfect example of 12th century opulence. It is cut from rock crystal and decorated with a filigree of gold. And displayed is the emblem of France, the fleur-de-lis. Also on this vase is Latin script that would later be added. It reads as thus. Eleanor, his wife, gave this to King Louis. Matilda gave it to her grandfather, and the king gave it to me, I, Suja. From this inscription we learn that one day the deeply religious French king would donate this priceless item to the Abbey of Saint-Denis, thus Abbot Suger. And it is he, Suger, who added to the script. And this amazing piece can be seen today in the Louvre, the Vase d'Eleanor. And this vase was vintage even by Eleanor's time, having originated in the Islamic world. The metadolus of the inscription being Abdul Malik Ahmad al-Dawla, and he ruled a part of Moorish Spain in the early 12th century. Taifa of Zaragoza, which formed part of Al-Andalus, North Spain, the Barcelona area. One thing you can say about the 12th century is the sheer opulence of it all. High-born Matilda of Flanders, with her crowning event, would have stood mouth agape at the spectacle that stood before her eyes here at Morbihan in Poitiers. She most likely wouldn't have approved of the wanton decadence at a week-long pig-out at Christmas. And this complete oinker was huge. And it wasn't just the nobility, you got the alms. Anything not eaten would be handed to the church, thus the poor.
Oh, are you sure you're wanting the rest of that swan, sire?
Oh, think of the hungry children.
The venison doesn't look too bad either.
Alms was a huge part of the medieval world, long before Matilda or Eleanor. Old Christian values. Helping the poor and destitute has always been a focus for the church, and the concept of chivalry meant the nobility were obliged to follow by example. So in this case, our dear old monk is absolutely correct. So bring out the alms. During this opulence, several vassals were slow to pay homage. This was to be expected, but one didn't even bother to attend. Guillaume de Lezay. And that's Lezay, not lazy. He's far from lazy. He's the Castellan of the Duchess's hunting lodge at Talmont. He's making a political point, that he doesn't support Eleanor nor Louis. He even stole some of Eleanor's falcons. He's naughty. What a pickle. You see, vassalage isn't as easy as simply swearing an oath. There is more to it than that. The politics of vassals and loyalty is just as much as complicated as the politics prior to the outbreak of World War I. Even worse, the politics of the TV show EastEnders.
Oh, anyone seen my Willie?
Willie was Ethel's dog, in case you're wondering. The dog was often lost, and a running joke in the show was Ethel announcing that she was trying to find her Willie. Yep, intellectual British humour. He did not get away with it. No, not Willie. Well, actually, yes in a way, because Guillaume is French for William. So, Willie. But we're referencing the Castellan of Talmont, not Ethel's dog. Guillaume de Lezay was not getting away from escaping his vassalage to Eleanor. Not on Louis's watch. Because Louis gathered some knights and headed for Talmont for a little spot of hunting. Actually, you'll be interested in this caper, because Guillaume de Lezay got wind that Louis was heading his way, and he came up with a plan to kidnap him and grab him for a cheeky ransom. And poor Louis wasn't expecting this. His Meunier didn't travel with armour. All that was kept in baggage cars. This was a hunting trip, a bit of roughhousing to sway de Lezay back to Eleanor. And they travelled in the hot August sun of the medieval warm period. No sooner had Louis's Meunier arrived, the trap was sprung. Several knights were captured, taken prisoner. But what may have been a jape now turned into a fight. Louis's French knights, without mail, and most likely only carrying their belted swords with no shields, fought back, protecting their young and future king, who, by the way, had never had a fight before, nothing on any good scale, not personally in armed melee. And the king's only in his late teens around this point, and boy did he put up a fight. The knights of de Lezay were cut down mercilessly. They didn't stand a chance. And once the melee was won, Louis would brutally punish de Lezay, delivering the punishment personally. Despite his father's wishes, Louis's temper flares, as the rebel knight would have both his hands cut off. Worse, he'd survive this ordeal. But he's no longer a knight, reduced to a cripple with no hands, Brutal. Then afterwards, it's like nothing has happened, because Louis and his Meunier go back to Poitiers. And soon he, with Eleanor and her sister Petronilla, would head first to Orleans and then Paris. Actually, I will quickly mention that Paris isn't the capital of France at this point. That title belonged to Orleans at this point in time. Paris is a city on the Seine, the Ile de la Cité. Important nonetheless is where the king currently resides, but it's just not the capital. Okay, it's not just the island itself, it's growing, but the roots of Paris start here. So, at Orleans, the revelry began again. Now, so far, I've promoted the sheer excess of the French. No excess spared. The credit's good. But Eleanor wasn't French, nor was her sister Petronilla, nor was the entourage. And the excess of the two sisters actually shocked the French. To say they enjoyed themselves at Orleans would be an understatement. And once this oinker of a pig out had to be completed, they continued their journey en route to Paris. It was on this last stretch that a messenger intercepted the royal entourage, delivering the bad news about the king. Here it dawns upon them that they are now king and queen. It would also dawn upon Louis that his father would never see his son married. So when Eleanor approached Paris, which drew closer on horizon, she did so with new royal vigour, entering the city as queen. And about the city itself of Paris, or as it's known, Paris. Ignore the magnificence of modern-day Paris. Yes, it was already a fabulous city. It was a legend of its time. But it was an old, smelly, especially in the summer, crumbling town. It had seen better days. The streets were unpaved for a start. The good point would be it's surrounded by orchards, vineyards, and the nearby Béthésy, which was a lavish castle. So it wasn't all that bad. And plus, the people of Paris loved Eleanor. And the parade, the parade. They lined the streets as the royal entourage went by. Then they reached an olive tree, because there was a French tradition that you did before you entered the city palace. Right, there's an old tree stump, shadowed by the olive tree that had grown over it over time, and it had become a traditional marker for French royalty to dismount their horses before entering the city palace, which they now did. Now, this palace no longer exists, long relegated to the annals of history, but the Palais de Justice does exist, and that's the site of the original 12th century palace. And by the Palais de Justice, I mean the one on the Ile de la Cité, next to Saint-Chapelle. The heart of Paris. Once upon a time, this was the royal residence of the medieval Capetian kings. And also, take in mind that this was no neoclassical 100-room affair. The French were conservative by nature, and they had traditions going back to Charlemagne. So when I say chateau or palace, I refer to a castle, as did they. And we're familiar with castles. And, like the others, this was a military installation built for purpose rather than luxury. It still had small, drafty rooms illuminated only by arrow slits. And this was to be Eleanor's new house of residence? She wasn't impressed. She's used to more spacious affairs, not this old-school military installation. And we know she objected to it because she certainly got her wish. Because all of a sudden, the old French castle was expanded. More rooms, spacious. She had shutters added, fireplaces, adding to the luxuries of the chateau. So if only we could be flies on the wall, earwigging on their conversations while all this was going on. Now, the French were far from uncouth, far from it. But the way Eleanor's acting, you'd think they're barbarians. She's demanding tablecloths, napkins, the mandatory washing of hands for the serving staff. All the traditions that she's importing from Aquitaine. She's changing the palace gardens. They now smell of mint and absinthe. There's willows, fig trees, pear trees. All this is sounding more aching to a 17th century call to the Sun King or something, rather than a 12th century affair. All she needs now are beds of roses, and she's got them too, even enclosed by walls. It didn't go down well with the French, and their troubles were far from over, because it wasn't just the decor that needed an upgrade in her eyes, it was the entertainment as well, the whole establishment. Eleanor is going hog wild, introducing alien concepts like troubadours, jongleurs. Yeah, sure, they're French words, but they are provincial concepts. She brought over men like Bernard de Ventadon, an Occitan troubadour known as the Master Singer, a prolific poet, highly famous in his time, and around 18 of his poems still survive today. A musical genius. There were more changes. Plays were conducted in Latin. She even sacked the cantor of the Chapelle de Nicolas after hearing him perform just once, replacing him with her own cantor, who apparently did a much better job. And these concepts would be here to stay. They're going to form much of the medieval world. In this part of Europe anyway, and eventually England. By the time Eleanor has finished with Paris, the conservative French are probably in shell shock. Her husband Louis invited schools to have access to the royal gardens, and many of the noble ladies would listen in. As mentioned by Pierre Abelard, a famous philosopher of his time and a lecturer. Though apparently Eleanor was never among them. When it came down to indoors, the Queen and her ladies would spend time singing, playing games like chess and general gossip. Though the traditional lifestyle of the noble lady appeared to bore the outgoing Eleanor, who'd be often confined to quarters during rainy days. She loved hawking for a start, loved going on the hunts. She was no kept woman, no trophy wife. And there's no way she'd be confined to quarters during the winter either. She's not even been married a year, and she's already brought the ways of the troubadours, along with their songs of love to the French. She's altered a military installation, and she's built a garden paradise, worthy of any future king. A new age was dawning, but paradise could not last forever.